The PDF info endpoint extracts a PDF's metadata as a JSON document. In this tutorial, we use the PDF info endpoint to fetch metadata from a PDF document and return the metadata as a JSON document. We first call the PDF info REST endpoint directly using curl. We then use the 4 different client libraries to invoke the REST endpoint programmatically. The DynamicPDF Cloud API consists of the following REST endpoints: DLX layout, image info, PDF text, PDF XMP, and PDF. Let's open the tutorial by navigating to Docs, Tutorials, Cloud API, and then select Extract PDF Metadata. This brings us to the tutorial Extract PDF Metadata. To complete this tutorial, we must first add the PDFs that we need to our samples folder in cloud storage space, and we add them using the resource manager. Let's go ahead and see what we need to add. We need to add fw4.pdf, and we're going to download it to our local file system. In this tutorial, we're going to assume that we have /temp /DynamicPDF API samples /get PDF info. So that's where we want to download our PDF to. Let's go ahead and log in so that we can go ahead and get this resource. Okay, go up here to log in. Let's go ahead and log in. And notice if we don't have an account, you can get an account here by signing up for free, but let's assume you have an account, and that takes us to our environment manager. Okay, so then go to Manage Resources, select Samples, Add Samples, and then there is, where is it? Get PDF Information. So that's the PDF info endpoint. Click OK, and it's added it. So if we go up here to Get PDF info endpoint, there's our resource. So let's right click, download. That downloads it to our local file system. And it opens it because it's a PDF. So, my computer opens it automatically. And let's go ahead and delete this just to show we don't need the file in our cloud resources. Okay, so right click, delete. And now we have our resource. So let's close and return back to the project. Now let's use curl to call the PDF REST endpoint directly. Open Notepad and copy the curl command that you see here. So here's the command. We have curl post. It's a post command, so we do -X. There's the URL to the PDF info endpoint, our authorization key, the content type, and let's see, the content type is application PDF. And then we specify data binary because the input file that we're going to get from our local file system, or fw4.pdf, is a binary file. Okay, we need to get the API key. So let's go ahead and get the API key. Return to the environment manager, and then select apps and API keys, copy, and that copies the API key to your clipboard. And let's return to Notepad and paste the API key. Now, don't forget bearer. Bearer is an important part of the API key. So the actual value is bearer space the API key. Now that we have the complete command, let's copy and paste it in the command prompt and run it. Okay, let's paste it, hit return and run it. And there we go. There's the JSON document outputted with all the metadata associated with that PDF. Now don't worry, although we can't really read it here, in the Java example, I'll format the JSON output. As you can see, we have stuff like the author, the subject, the page number, the form fields, basically all the information associated with that PDF. Now let's consider the .NET C# example. You can get the C# tutorial examples from GitHub, and the project name is .NET-client-examples. And okay, and you obviously to use the examples project, you'd also need to get the DynamicPDF API client library for C#, and you can get that from NuGet. And we're going to do that actually in the next couple steps. Okay, now let's go ahead and start Visual Studio. Wait for it to load. I'm assuming you already have the .NET Client Examples project installed, so let's go ahead and select that. Wait for the solution to load. Now you should see the Get PDF Info project already installed. We're going to delete it, but first let's take a look at it. Open program. And there's the program, or there's the code we're going to write in just a few minutes. Now let's go ahead and just delete this. Close it, and let's delete the project. When we delete the project, be sure that you also delete it from disk, otherwise you'll get an error when you try to create it in just a minute. Now that we've deleted the project, let's go ahead and create it from scratch. Go up to the solution, right-click, select Add, New Project. Wait for it to load, and then we're going to create a C#.NET console application. Let's see, I forgot the name, so let's go to the project. Let's go back to the documentation and let's find the name of the project. Sorry about that. Oh yeah, the name is going to be Get PDF Info. Now that we're here, let's go ahead and briefly outline the steps we're going to do. We're going to install the NuGet package. We've created the console app named Get PDF Info. We're going to add the NuGet package to it. We're going to create a new static method named run that takes the API key and path, the base path as strings. We're going to add the call to run domain. We're going to create a new PDF resource instance that takes the path to the PDF. We're going to create a new PDF info instance and pass the PDF resource instance to the constructor. We're going to add a call. We're going to then call the endpoint using the PDF info instance's process method. We're going to check that the call was successful. And if it's successful, then we're going to write the PDF information as JSON metadata to the console. Okay, so let's return to the project. And first, let's copy and paste the get PDF info string for the name. Okay, let's return to the Add a New Project dialog. Okay, we're creating a console app, .NET Core. Next. Now paste the name. Click Create, and the project appears with program.cs loaded. Before we do anything else, let's add the NuGet package. So go up to the project, right-click Get PDF Info, Manage NuGet Packages. After it loads, be sure to select the Browse tab and add DynamicPDF.API. That's the NuGet package we want to install. Click Install, select OK. Then wait for it to install, and after it's installed, go ahead and close the tab. And we're going to go ahead and create the run method, a static run method. And in that method, we're going to have a string for the API key and a string for the base path. So let's see, static void run string API key, string base path. Before we forget, let's go ahead and go up to main and let's replace console.writeLine with the run method. So it is run. And let's just go ahead and write API key here for now. We're going to go get it in a second. Let's see, now the base path is C /temp / DynamicPDF-API-samples /get -PDF-info /. We need to go get the API key, so let's go get it. Return to the Environment Manager, select Apps and API Keys, copy, Close it. So now we have the key in our clipboard. Now return to Visual Studio and then paste the value where API key is. Now that we've added the API key and we've got the base path, let's go down to Run and let's start adding the code that does the actual work. We need to create a new instance of PDF info. PDF info encapsulates the logic for calling the PDF info endpoint. PDF info equals new PDF info. Okay, now the PDF info constructor takes a PDF resource, and that is the actual PDF document that we wish to load and then process. So we need to create a new PDF resource instance and pass the, what was the file, fw4.pdf? That's what we need to pass to it. New PDF resource. And in the constructor base path plus fw4.pdf. Now add the API key. So PDF info.api key equals API key. Now we're going to call the PDF info instances process method. That's going to call the PDF info endpoint, process it, and return a PDF info response. Okay, so we need to get the response as a PDF info response. So PDF info response equals PDF info dot process. Now we want to check, and if the response is successful, then we want to go ahead and print out the JSON response. Otherwise, we want to print out the JSON error message. So if PDF info response dot is successful, then console.writeLine PDF info response.json content. Otherwise, it's an error. So let's do else console.writeLine PDF info response.error.json. Now let's review before we run it. We have the main method, run, the string for the API key, the string for the base path. Then we set the API key. Let's see, PDF, I guess I should start with PDF info. So we get the PDF resource from our local file system. Then we get the API key. Then we call the process method. It returns a PDF info response. This response, if it's successful, will print out the JSON content. If it's not successful, then it's going to print it out to the console as well, but it's going to print out the error JSON. So now let's go ahead and run it. Oh, be sure to change up here to the right project. Run. Now wait for it to load. And there you go. There's the JSON string. And of course, like before, it's Not formatted very well, but don't worry, we'll do that in just a minute when we do the Java example. Of course, formatting JSON strings is not too difficult, and there's lots of information on the web that you can look up if you need to format the JSON. Okay, so that's the C# example. Now let's consider the Java example. And in the interest of time, we're not going to go over the project from scratch. We're going to review the project as it already exists. But you'll see in this example, in the Java example, and the next two other languages, PHP and Node.js, you'll see that the syntax is pretty much the same as the C# example. You can get the project from GitHub, and the project's name is Java Client Examples. Of course, you'll need to get the DynamicPDF API's client library for Java, and you can get that from Maven. If we very briefly review the steps here, we can see the steps are the same as for the C#.NET example. We're going to create a new class named getPDFInfo with a main method. We're going to add a run method, and then we're going to create a PDF resource that gets the PDF from our local file system. We're going to create a PDFInfo instance and pass the PDF resource to it. Then we're going to call the endpoint using process. And if it's successful, we're going to write out the JSON metadata. Otherwise, we're going to write out an error. Now, I like to use Eclipse, so let's go ahead and start Eclipse. I assume you already have the project loaded in Eclipse. Launch. Wait for it to load. Notice the getPDFInfo.java class. Let's go ahead and open it. Okay, let's go ahead and expand this tab so we can see it better. If you look at the run method, you'll see PDF resource equals new PDF resource, PDF info equals new PDF info, and we pass the resource. Then we get the API key. Then we get the response. Then, if it's successful, we print out the JSON to our console. Otherwise, we print out the error. Okay, let's replace the API key with the API key. Now, I promised you we would look at the formatted JSON, so let's go ahead and do this. If you go down to util, you'll see something called pretty print utility. This is just a simple utility to format the JSON. So now let's add this to the print line statement. So pretty print utility dot, because it's a static method, pretty print JSON. And then let's add the PDF responses JSON content to that method instead. Okay, now let's run it. And there you go. There is the JSON metadata for the PDF formatted so that we can see it a little better. And notice that the PDF that we looked at the metadata for, which was a form, it was a form actually, it was an IRS tax form. So we have things, not only do we have top level data such as author, subject, keywords, creator, things like that, we also have the pages, and it's, let's see, it says there are 4 pages. And then it has the form fields because it's a form. And in each one of these, we see that the form field name, and there is no value yet, so there's no value there. Now let's consider the Node.js example. You can get the example project from GitHub, and the name of the project is Node.js-client-examples. And of course, you need the Node package manager to get the DynamicPDF client API. Okay, so let's review the steps again real quick, but they should look familiar. We create a new class named getPDFInfo, create a static run method. In the run method, we create a new PDF resource from the resource on the file path. We create a new PDF info instance and pass the PDF resource instance to it. Then we add a call. Then we call the endpoint using the process method. We check that it's successful. If it's successful, we write the PDF's metadata to the console. Otherwise, we print out the error. I like to use Visual Studio Code, so let's go ahead and start Visual Studio Code. Now, I assume you already have the project loaded. Open the getPDFinfo.js file, and there it is. There's the getPDFinfo. We get the PDF resource. We set the API key. We call the process method. If it's successful, we print it to the console. Otherwise, we print the error to the console. And then we add at the bottom, await getPDFinfo.run. Okay, let's run the example. Node getPDFinfo.js, hit return. And there we go. There's the JSON metadata. Now let's consider the PHP example. You can download the PHP example from GitHub, and the project is PHP client examples. And of course, you'll need the client library for PHP, and you can get that using Composer. And let's look at the steps here. The steps are pretty much exactly the same as the other client libraries. We create a new class named getPDFinfo. We add the run method. In the run method, we create a new PDF resource instance, takes a path to the PDF. We create a new PDF info instance and pass the PDF resource instance to the constructor. We call the PDF info instance's process method to get the PDF response. We check that the call was successful, and if it was successful, we write the PDF information, the JSON metadata that is, to the console. Otherwise, we print out the error. Okay, let's open Visual Studio Code, and I assume you already have the project loaded. Open getPDFinfo.php, and there's the file. It should look pretty much like the other three examples. First we get a new PDF resource instance from the base path in the file. Then we create a new PDF info instance passing the resource. We get the API key. We call the process method. Then if the response is successful, we print out the JSON content. Otherwise, we print out the error. And then down here at the bottom, we have getPDFinfo run so that we can run this PHP file as a standalone application. PHP getPDFinfo.php. Hit return, and there's the JSON data. Okay, let's review what we've done here. So first we got an instance of a PDF resource passing the path to the file, the PDF file that we want to examine the metadata for. Then we created a new PDF info instance and passed the resource to the constructor. Then we obtained the API key from apps and API key. Then we called the PDF instance's process method. Then, if it was successful, we printed out the metadata as JSON. If it wasn't successful, then we printed out the error JSON. So as you can see, getting a PDF's metadata using the PDF info endpoint is straightforward using DynamicPDF Cloud API's REST endpoint. I'm James, developer evangelist at DynamicPDF, reminding you, when you think DynamicPDF, think DynamicPDF Cloud API. See you next time.